Welcome to the Blue Mountains Creatorspace Blackmagic DaVinci Resolve Workshop 103. Here we'll be looking at how we can edit our footage and trim it, adjust it, add some titles, and even adjust some of the sound and even add music to it. So let's begin. So where we were last session, we looked at adding a few shots together and we created shots 1, 2, 3. So we don't want to just really, I'm trying to keep it simple so it's A, B, C. We can look at how we can adjust that and amend things. So what I'm going to do first is look at some of the built-in tools that we can use. So right up here on this part of the timeline, right, we have this beautiful plus minus. I'm just covering it with the mouse. So we got a plus minus, right, and that we can use to actually expand and zoom in to our sequence. So you can see how quickly that can help to zoom in, right? And that's a great tool because now we can zoom in what previously was really tiny, right? We can really zoom into it and get an idea of what we're dealing with, especially if it's only 16 seconds of a sequence that we put together. So we got shot 1, 2, 3, right? So right away with the mouse, I can just click on these and I can just move them around, right? So it's always like a bit of a game of Tetris, I say. And we can move these around. I can drag this one over and so on, right? So Command Z just to bring it all back. I'm just gonna roll back here. We got 1, 2, 3. So this can all be moved around. And that's one way we can quickly resequence our shots, right? So depending on what we click on. The next thing we can do is we actually have this trim tool right here. So if we just use our mouse, we can actually trim, and this is called a rolling trim. And what it's doing is it's not destroying anything, right? And this can also be accessed right on the keyboard here with the two arrows. So it's the comma and the period, right? And the two arrow keys. And that can actually let us trim frame by frame, right? But what we're doing is we're just rolling from one shot to the other. So we can add a little bit to the end or the tail. We can take a little away from the head of this, right? So we can go back and forth like so. And then the other thing we can do is we can also click on one side and we can also take away frames. And again, that's fine tuning, but what it does is it creates a bit of a gap, right? So that's okay, because then we can technically take this and we can drag it in, snap it back like so, right? We can click on these as well, and we can also use that arrow key, and that will actually move the shot like so. And it just destroys what's underneath it in that manner, right? So we can close the gap like that. So we can do a little fine tuning that way as well. So again, if I click on that one, I'm just going to use the arrow key to go this left or right? So I just want to go to the left. I'm just going to close the gap. I can just go frame by frame like that. So real nice fine tuning that we can do. So what we can do next is we can use this other tool right here, which is the trim edit mode. So if I click on that, I can now decide which part I want to use on the actual shot. So do I want to trim this both between the two? It's called a dual roller, right? So again, with the keyboard, I can just use left or right. And this is what it does to the sequence. So it just trims like the other one did using the keyboard, right? Besides the dual roller, I can also use the one-sided roller. So I can deal with the head of this shot or the tail of this shot. So if I click just on this side, watch what will happen to the actual edit if I use my mouse keys. So what happens is if I'm going to the right, it's actually adding frames. So what this is in essence doing is it's pushing these two shots and it's not destroying anything. So it's quite a handy tool. So that can be on the tail, it can also be on the head. So again, if I click on this side and I use the arrow keys on the keyboard right here, right, I can be adding shots to the sequence, less or more. Right, so that's a perfect way to deal with our edits. So the next thing I can do is, so this takes me back, this cursor here just takes me back to this regular editing mode, right? The other thing I can do too is I can use this razor blade right here. And by engaging the razor blade, I can go anywhere on the shot and I can just cut up the shot. And you can see right down here now, we have this like cut line on the actual shot. And that lets me then take the mouse, I can click on shots and I can just hit delete on the keyboard. So just the delete button right here, right? And it can take stuff out, and then it can also like close the gap that way. So just Command Z and undo all that work. Quite some simple tools to edit with, and we can move things around and make it all work really nicely. So the next thing I want to look at is how we can do some video transitions. So we've seen dissolves and fades. So we want to be able to add a few of those. So how can we do that? The easiest way to do that is if we just go over here to the toolbox, and it's just right here, there's video transitions, and it's going to give us a bunch of presets that we can use. And all we need to do is if I take the cross dissolve, so that's that standard dissolve between two shots, I just grab that and drag it over. And look what this does now. It creates a dissolve between the two shots. And it's that simple. I can also do trimming work on that. I can take my mouse and then trim this, and it tells me how many frames I'm adding or subtracting. So I can make the dissolve longer, smaller, and so on. Okay, so that's a real great tool there. What I can also do is there's these little white tabs on the sides, and I can drag those and make shots fade out.
Evil story time. Oh, and
right? So I can do that on both sides, and I can create a quick dip. So dip to black.
evil story time.
Right, so let's see what that looks like. Just gonna zoom out here.
Evil story time. Oh, and your
Right, so it's a quick way to add a few transitions. So they can be either these video transitions that are available on this side, I can just drag them in, right? Or I can do them right in the sequence itself and add a few in and out points like that. The last thing here now too we want to look at is how we can add some graphics. So if we want to add some titles, they're pretty simple to add. Again, we just drag them in, and then we can manipulate them in the inspector window up here. So let's look at that. So we're going to go over here, we're going to hit titles, and then there's different types of titles. There's lower thirds, and that's usually referred to as if we're putting name titles. So let me just show you guys the difference between the two. So here's a lower third. You can see I just drag it right on top, and it gives me this little thing that says title, right? So, and then if I go up to inspector, I can actually decide what the title is. So I can say Bob, and I'll go to the next title. Person of interest. There we go. So we have a title.
love these vibrant, peaceful spaces.
And it's just like any kind of a Word document idea. We can change the fonts, right? So I can use the Thornberry font. I can make it light, bold, right? I can make it bigger, smaller with just sizing it, right? So a lot of fun, quick ways to deal with the title. And just like we did with the other shots, so you can see I put it right on top. The key here is that I've put the title on top of video 1 to make video 2. I can also do these transitions. So I can make
love these
fade
vibrant, peaceful
and fade out
spaces.
And these can also be trimmed, moved, just like the other video shots, right? So by using video 2, we got to think about the idea that we're basically layering, right? So there's the bottom track and there's video 2, and that's where our titles are going to live on top, right? So video 1, video 2. Layers are just the same principle as in Photoshop or building any kind of graphics. We're putting the base layer and a top layer. So the graphics in this case are the titles, and they're on top of video 1. So I can take this, I can move it around, and I can also do trimming, right? So again, trimming with the arrows right here, I can make it smaller, right? Smaller, shorter. And that lets me then quickly deal with everything that I want to do for the timing of this. So that's all of our edit, all the way through to graphics. And then we're essentially almost done. The last thing we can do is if we just need to do a little bit of music or deal with some of the levels, we can first look at any of our levels here. So if I play back.
Hey Johnny!
And the levels are pretty good there, but what we can also do is we can look at the sequence here and say, hey, I want to bring the levels up or down. And you can instantly just go into each track, and you can see right here it's giving me a decibel reading. So I can boost that, up a couple decibels. And decibels are the way that sound levels are monitored. So zeros are base. So typically, adding 2 to 4 decibels can just help with levels.
Hope you're enjoying your after-school bilingual story time.
Right, so that's nice. We've helped our levels and we can increase it or decrease it. And you notice that it gets a bit of a darker shade, and that means I've adjusted the audio levels right there. So that's a way we can quickly do some leveling. So what I'm gonna do last here is I'm gonna just import a piece of music. Okay, so I'm just gonna double click that, import it. So I got a piece of music. And now the difference with sound is that we're only gonna see these wave files. So the audio wave files, we're not gonna see any picture, but the same applies, that we still have our source and we have our sequence of where we want it. And in the same manner that we did the titles and put that onto video 2, then we have video 1, we're gonna wanna create an audio 2. So what we can do is we can drag it down. So I can just take this clip and bring it right down here. And that creates an audio 2, right? So it's right down here. I can also, I'm gonna Command Z to undo that. I can also go right down here. I can essentially go down here and then right click, right? So if I right click on my mouse, if you do have it set up as a right click, and I can then add a track. So I'm gonna say add a stereo track. And the reason I'm gonna add a stereo track is because the music is in stereo. And the way I know that is two ways, that it says 1 and 2, and I can also look at the inspector and it's gonna tell me, you know, that the audio has 2 channels and so on, right? So let's go back to turning that off. And so here's my 1 and 2. I'm gonna do right click, add track, stereo, right? So now I've created that. And then what I can do is I can identify where I want it to go. So by clicking these squares, I tell where the edit's gonna go. So I'm gonna click on audio 2, and now that square has been activated. I'm gonna bring my cursor back here, right? And we have our music right from the beginning. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna overwrite it. Okay, and let's zoom out because it's a short sequence. It's gonna roll back to the beginning here. And what it's done is, you can see the overwrite has just placed it underneath my existing shots in my cut. So that's great. So that was just done with the actual overwrite. So now, if I do the alternative, which is the insert, watch what happens. It's gonna push all that footage back, right? And then the music's right here, but we want the music underneath the music. So that's why we want to choose the overwrite. So I'm just gonna go back here again. So I just did the Command Z to undo that. I'm gonna choose the overwrite function. Hit overwrite, you can see now it's underneath it. Now if I play it.
Love these vibrant, peaceful spaces.
Right, the music's pretty loud. So what we want to do typically, what I like to do is have the music down to about -16 to -20 decibels. And that will just help us preserve the levels of the original video clip. So I just went down to -20, so let's give it a listen now.
Hey Johnny, hope you're enjoying your after school.
Right, hear the music. We can probably even put the music a bit louder. It's not too heavy. So here we go, right from the beginning.
Love these vibrant, peaceful spaces. Hey Johnny, hope you're enjoying your after-school bilingual story time. Oh, and your hip-hop yoga for kids program, dear.
Yes, that's great. And then the last thing I can do is I can just like I did with the video tracks, I can do the same idea here, and I can just trim down some of the audio so it just goes right to the end here. So I'm just gonna click right here, drag this, okay? And I will also zoom in there on the timeline. And what I can do is, as I did before with some of the other sequence elements of the video, I can make this audio just fade out, just dragging that white line there to do a fade out, so, or an audio dissolve.
Program, dear.
Right, that way the audio fades out at the end of the shot. And that's it. We have our first full sequence. We've added graphics, add a little bit of music to it. The last step is we want to be able to export this using our rocket ship delivery. So stay tuned for the next workshop.